Welcome to CrimePod Castle. I'm thrilled to have you here for the 5th episode of our series Ghosts of the Past.
This week, we're taking a deep dive into a case that really shook India back in 1990.
The case that sparked some really intense debates about justice and accountability.
And, of course, the death penalty.
Right, the ultimate penalty.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes this case so fascinating, even decades later, is how it kind of exposes those complexities of the Indian legal system, especially back then.
Oh, yeah?
You know, and how public pressure can really sway the scales of justice.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's set the scene for our listeners. We're in Kolkata in 1990, a bustling city, a sense of normalcy life just going on as usual. And in the middle of all of this, we have 14-year-old Hetal Parekh, a young life full of promise tragically cut short in what should have been the safety of her own home.
This case, you see, it really struck at the heart of a community's sense of security.
Yeah.
It raised these really difficult questions about, how vulnerable we are, even in places we consider safe.
Right. And the man convicted of her rape and murder, Dhananjay Chatterjee, became a real focal point of controversy. He ultimately became the first person executed in India in the 21st century. A decision that, as you can imagine, reignited the debate about capital punishment in India.
Oh, absolutely. A debate that's still very much alive today, by the way.
Oh, for sure. So in this deep dive, we're asking a question that's as relevant today as it was back then.
Okay.
Was justice truly served in the Hetal Parekh case? Did the punishment fit the crime? Or did systemic issues, societal pressure, the complexities of the legal system, did they muddy the waters of justice?
That's the question, isn't it? And to even begin to try to answer that, we need to go back to March 5th, 1990.
Okay.
The day Hetal's life was tragically taken. It started as an ordinary day for the Parekh family. A middle-class family living in what they thought was a secure apartment building in the bustling Bhawanipur area of Kolkata.
You know, it's chilling to think that such a horrific event could unfold on what seemed like any other day. Hetal's mother, Nandini, had left her alone in their apartment, which probably wouldn't have raised any eyebrows at the time. They trusted their community, their neighbors, their surroundings, and that's where the story takes a dark turn.
Yes, it does.
With the entry of Dhananjay Chatterjee, the building's 27-year-old security guard.
And here's where the narrative gets really complicated, because Dhananjay's presence in the building wasn't exactly uneventful. In fact, just days before the crime, Hetal's parents had actually lodged a complaint against him with the building management. They accused him of harassment, a detail that would later loom large over the entire case.
Oh, wow.
It's like a crack in that facade of normalcy, a foreboding sign that something was amiss.
Yeah. So while Hetal was alone at home, Dhananjay, according to the prosecution's narrative, saw an opportunity. He allegedly used the guise of collecting dues for the building's water supply to get into the Parekh apartment.
Oh, wow.
A seemingly mundane task used as a cover for a horrific act.
Right.
It's detail that just sends chills down your spine.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the vulnerability of it all.
Absolutely. And once inside the details of what transpired, paint a pretty gruesome picture.
Yeah.
The investigation revealed a scene of violence, a struggle, signs of sexual assault.
Oh, my gosh.
Hetal was strangled to death. It's just a stark reminder of the brutality that can erupt even in seemingly safe spaces.
It really is. I can only imagine the shock and horror that rippled through the community when Nandini Parekh returned home to find her daughter's lifeless body.
It must have been devastating.
It was a tragedy that shattered that illusion of safety, the belief that such things couldn't happen in their midst. The news spread like wildfire, and the pressure on the Kolkata police to find the perpetrator and deliver justice was immense.
The police immediately launched a full-scale investigation, and it was the fingerprints found at the crime scene. That became a focal point, a piece of the puzzle that would ultimately lead them to Dhananjay Chatterjee.
And remember, this was 1990, long before DNA analysis became commonplace in criminal investigations.
Right.
Fingerprints were often the most reliable forensic evidence available.
So those fingerprints, along with statements from residents who had observed Dhananjay's behavior prior to the crime, quickly cast suspicion on him. But what really solidified him as the prime suspect was his sudden disappearance right after the crime.
Yeah.
It was as if he vanished into thin air, which of course fueled public suspicion, and so began a nationwide manhunt. A desperate search for a man who'd become the face of this horrific crime.
Weeks later, Dhananjay was apprehended in his hometown.
Wow.
A small village in West Bengal. His arrest was a turning point in the case.
Yeah.
The culmination of a tense period of uncertainty and fear.
Right.
It also marked the beginning of a legal battle that would drag on for years, a battle that would expose both the strengths and weaknesses of India's justice system.
And this is where things get even more complex.
Because while the prosecution believed they had their man, Dhananjay, upon interrogation, initially denied any involvement in the crime. He claimed he was innocent upon in a larger game.
Right.
A victim of circumstance. So what started as a seemingly straightforward case quickly became a tangled web of accusations, denials, and conflicting narratives.
And that's precisely what makes this case so fascinating, so enduring.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about determining guilt or innocence. It was about understanding the intricate workings of the justice system, the influence of societal perceptions, and the ethical dilemmas surrounding capital punishment.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing more and more complexity with each layer.
Exactly.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the trial itself, the arguments presented by both sides.
Yes.
And the verdict that sent shockwaves through India.
I'll explore the legal strategies, the evidence presented, and the courtroom drama that captivated a nation hungry for justice.
It's going to be fascinating.
And we'll see how the Dhananjay Chatterjee case became a touchstone for broader discussions about the death penalty, the role of evidence, and the pursuit of justice in a complex and ever-evolving society.
Can't wait.
So with Dhananjay Chatterjee's arrest, the wheels of justice started turning, setting the stage for a trial that would grip the nation.
But this was 1990s. India, the legal landscape was very different then. Forensic science wasn't as advanced as it is today.
Right.
And societal pressures often influence the course of justice.
Exactly. And that context is crucial to understanding the complexities of this case. The trial began in 1991.
Okay.
And right from the start, it was clear that the prosecution's case rested heavily on circumstantial evidence.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with legal jargon, could you break down what circumstantial evidence means in this context?
Of course, in simple terms, circumstantial evidence is indirect evidence. It doesn't directly prove a fact, but relies on inferences to connect the dots. For instance, in this case, Dhananjay's fingerprints at the scene and his disappearance after the crime were presented as circumstantial evidence.
Ah, I see. So it's not a smoking gun, but a series of clues that point towards a conclusion.
Precisely, and that's what made this trial so intriguing. The prosecution had to weave together a compelling narrative using these clues, convincing the jury that Dhananjay was the only one who could have committed the crime.
So what were some of the key arguments presented by the prosecution during the trial?
Well, they argued that Dhananjay's motives stemmed from anger and lust. Remember the complaint Hetal's parents filed against him.
Yeah.
The prosecution claimed this fueled his resentment, leading him to commit the crime. They also pointed to his sudden disappearance as a sign of guilt.
Right.
If he was innocent, why would he flee?
That does seem like incriminating behavior, but what about the defense? How do they counter these arguments?
The defense fought tooth and nail, highlighting the fact that much of the evidence was indeed circumstantial. They insisted that Dhananjay's confession had been coerced under pressure, a common allegation in cases like this where the accused often feel powerless against the might of the legal system.
It's interesting how the defense tried to shift the focus from Dhananjay's actions to the methods used by the authorities. Did they offer any alternative theories about the crime?
They did. The defense painted Dhananjay as a scapegoat, suggesting that someone else might have been responsible for the crime.
Okay.
They also brought up his socioeconomic background, hinting that his poverty and lack of access to strong legal representation made him an easy target.
That's a really important point you bring up.
Yeah.
The case wasn't just about legal arguments. It touched upon deeper societal issues like class and access to justice.
Absolutely. The Dhananjay Chatterjee case became a reflection of the inequalities that permeate many justice systems around the world.
So with all these conflicting narratives and arguments flying back and forth, what was the outcome of this high-stakes trial?
Well, in 1991, after months of intense proceedings, the Sessions Court delivered its verdict guilty. Dhananjay Chatterjee was sentenced to death for the rape and murder of Hetal Parekh.
Wow, a death sentence that must have sent shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond.
It did. The verdict divided public opinion, with some hailing it as a victory for justice, while others expressed concerns about the reliance on circumstantial evidence and the severity of the punishment.
So was this the end of the road for Dhananjay Chatterjee?
Not at all. This was just the beginning of a long and arduous legal battle.
Oh, wow.
That would see the case move through different levels of the Indian judicial system, with each appeal bringing renewed hope for Dhananjay and his supporters, and escalating tension for those who believed justice had been served.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. we'll explore the appeals process,
Yes.
the arguments presented before higher courts, and the final verdict that sealed Danajoy's fate.
We'll also examine the ethical considerations surrounding the death penalty,
Okay.
the role of public opinion in shaping legal outcomes, and the long-lasting impact of the Hetal Parekh case on India's legal and social landscape.
Sounds fascinating. Can't wait. So, as we saw, the Danajoy Chatterjee case was far from simple.
Oh, yeah.
The Sessions Court's guilty verdict and death sentence weren't the end of the story.
Not even close. This case went on a 14-year journey through the Indian legal system. Dhananjoy's lawyers were determined
Wow.
to explore every avenue to fight for his life. They appealed the verdict first to the Calcutta High Court and then ultimately to the Supreme Court of India. Imagine the emotional roller coaster
I know.
for everyone involved.
Huh.
Years of uncertainty, hope clashing with despair.
It's hard to fathom that the weight of that, the years ticking by with such a heavy sentence hanging over your head. What were the key arguments presented during these appeals? Did anything new come to light?
Well, the defense continued to challenge that reliance on circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
They argued that the prosecution hadn't definitively proven Dhananjoy's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a cornerstone of any justice system. They brought up the possibility of a biased investigation, the potential for coerced confessions, all in an effort to cast doubt on the lower court's findings.
It's like they were trying to unravel the prosecution's narrative, thread by thread, highlighting those potential flaws in the case against Danajoy. But how did the higher courts respond to these arguments? Did they see any merit in them?
Well, the High Court in 1994 and then the Supreme Court in 2004 both upheld the death sentence.
Wow.
They reviewed the evidence, the trial procedures, everything, but they ultimately concluded that the lower court's judgment was sound, that the evidence, though largely circumstantial, was strong enough to warrant the conviction.
So despite the defense's best efforts, the legal system reaffirmed Dhananjoy's guilt. What happened next? Was there any further recourse for him at that point?
At that point, the only option left was a plea for clemency, a request for mercy from the President of India. This is where the case entered the realm of public debate even more intensely. Human rights organizations, legal experts, and even members of the public weighed in, arguing both for and against clemency.
It becomes a question of not just legal technicalities, but of ethics and societal values. What were the key arguments presented during the clemency pleas?
Well, those advocating for clemency stressed the inherent cruelty of the death penalty, arguing that it's an irreversible punishment that leaves no room for error. They highlighted the concerns about the investigation and trial, the possibility of an innocent man being executed. They appealed to the president's sense of compassion and urged for a commutation of the sentence, perhaps to life imprisonment.
It's a moment where the personal and the political intersect, where individual lives hang in the balance of a decision made at the highest level. What was the outcome of these pleas?
Despite the impassioned pleas, the president rejected Dhananjoy Chatterjee's clemency petition. The date for his execution was set August 14, 2004. This decision reignited that debate about capital punishment in India, bringing it to the forefront of public discourse. People grappled with the moral implications of the death penalty, the idea of state-sanctioned killing, and the possibility of executing an innocent person.
It's a stark reminder of the gravity of these decisions, the weight they carry for individuals, families, and society as a whole. It's easy to get lost in the legal back and forth, but ultimately we're talking about a human life. What was the reaction to the execution?
As you can imagine, it was a deeply emotional and divisive event. For Hetal's family, it was seen as a long-awaited moment of closure, a sense that justice had finally been served after 14 long years of waiting and legal battles. For them, Dhananjoy's execution was the only fitting punishment for the horrific crime he had committed.
It's understandable that they would feel that way, the need for some sense of resolution after such a traumatic experience. But what about those who oppose the death penalty? How do they react?
Well, for Dhananjoy's supporters and those against capital punishment, in principle, the execution was a tragic day. They saw it as a failure of the justice system, a sign that the system was more focused on retribution than rehabilitation. They continued to raise concerns about the trial, the evidence, and the possibility of a miscarriage of justice.
So even in the aftermath of the execution, the debate didn't end. The Dhananjoy Chatterjee case left behind a legacy of unanswered questions, a sense of unease for some, and a continued conversation about the role of capital punishment in a modern society.
Absolutely. This case became a landmark case in India, prompting discussions about legal reforms, forensic science advancements, and the need for greater transparency in the justice system.
Yeah.
It also brought to light those complexities of public opinion, how emotions and societal pressures can influence legal proceedings.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the Hetal Parekh case, we're left with more than just facts and dates. We're left with questions about the very essence of justice, the balance between punishment and rehabilitation, and that enduring debate surrounding the death penalty.
It's a case that reminds us that even decades later, the pursuit of justice is an ongoing journey, one that requires constant reflection, critical analysis, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Absolutely well said. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, encouraged you to think critically about these complex issues,
Yes.
and maybe even ignited a desire to learn more.
Remember, history isn't just about events in the past. It's about understanding how those events continue to shape our present and influence our future. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast for more deep dives into compelling stories from the past. We'll see you in the next episode.